Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain Black Bear. This movie tells the story of a former American soldier who has a weak body condition due to the previous war. He struggles to make money by fighting in MMA boxing competitions to treat his fellow soldiers lying in hospital due to the war. Will he succeed in winning the MMA boxing competition and finance his friend's surgery? Let's find out in Black Bear. Black Bear begins by showing the scene of 4 U.S. sniper soldiers carrying out an attack on the enemy base. A gunfight ensued, although in the end, the enemies were able to surround and capture all 4 of them alive. The enemy apparently not only held them captive but tortured them. One of the soldiers, a black man named Chris, was tortured and even injected with an experimental fluid. In another room, they torture and interrogate Bear, one of the soldiers, about how the United States troops found out about their base. Bear refuses to open his mouth until he finally gets the same injection as Chris. When the enemy guards were caught off guard, Chris managed to escape and then rescued Bear, Ryan, and Nash, 2 of their other soldiers. After being released, they managed to turn things around and take one of the enemy intelligence officers hostages. They then split the task, where Ryan and Nash would distract the guards at the base, while Chris and Bear would head out to make sure things were safe before taking the hostages. Chris and Bear were almost on the verge of clearing the path and ensuring things were safe when they gave different orders to the 2 partners. Bear asked Ryan and Nash to hold on for a while, waiting until it was safe outside. Meanwhile, Chris actually asked them to get out of the base immediately. But unfortunately, not long after, enemy fighter planes arrived and blew up the base, killing Ryan and Nash. Chris was furious, blaming Bear for ordering the 2 of them not to leave the base. Bear tried to calm Chris as he asked him to quickly leave the place to a safe location. The scene moves 3 months later, when Chris and Bear survive and are ready to leave the battlefield. However, despite escaping from the enemy base, Chris's health condition declined due to the injection given by the enemy. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed Chris' liver was damaged due to the fluid in the injection. While Chris was in the hospital, Bear had returned and was about to meet his ex-girlfriend, Skylar, whom he left to serve in Afghanistan for 3 years. After sharing their longing for each other, Bear asks Skylar to get back into a relationship with him, which she immediately refuses. She instead says he dumped her when he decided to go to war. Skylar's refusal that night didn't make Bear give up. The next night, he returns to Skylar's house. This time he comes with a box of chocolates as a gift and takes her out for a walk. Unfortunately, she again refused. However, Skylar's refusal and the deaths of his 2 partners on the battlefield frustrated Bear that he became a drug user. One night, Bear was drunk after taking drugs when 3 thugs approached and wanted to steal his belongings. This made Bear emotional, and he immediately beat them. Even when a police officer came to intervene, Bear beat him anyway. Another police officer came and immediately tried to secure him. The police took Bear to the hospital to get treatment before he was thrown into prison. Fortunately, while Bear was in the hospital, a military agency came and gave assurances to the police that he would not be jailed. The agency said that this was a reward after what he did for the country while on the battlefield. On the other hand, Chris was still in the hospital and talked to the doctor who treated him. The doctor informed Chris that his life would not be any longer and that he would only have at least 3 months. He then explained that Chris could survive if there was someone who would donate their liver, even though doing this would cost a lot of money. Bear, who had not been discharged from the hospital and intended to visit Chris, overheard the conversation behind the door. After knowing about Chris's condition, Bear walks away, determined to make money to help Chris' treatment. He contacts a friend named Doug to find a job to earn money. But Doug can't help because Bear doesn't have a top secret pass, making it nearly impossible to get a job. He instead advised him to return to the MMA boxing ring, saying it was a ticket to him earning a lot of money. The phone call with Doug reveals new facts about Bear, where he was an MMA boxer before becoming a soldier. The scene moves back to the hospital where Chris is being treated. That morning, Mia, Chris' wife, came to visit with the happy news of her pregnancy that they had been waiting for years. Meanwhile, Bear apparently followed Doug's advice and returned to the gym where he used to train as an MMA boxer. Once back in the gym, a beautiful woman named Summer, the receptionist, greeted Bear. Bear asked Summer if his former coach, Skylar's father, Bronx, is still around. Long story short, Bear managed to meet Bronx and asked him to return to being a coach. In addition, he then asks about Skylar, but again, he is faced with rejection. Bronx refuses to retrain him, and he explains that Skylar is currently married and even pregnant. The next day, Mia returned to visit Chris at the hospital. Mia's story was not responded to by Chris, who instead told his wife that he would not live long anymore. She was surprised by Chris' statement, and she cried in her husband's arms. At the same time, Bear returned to the gym to train alone in preparation for the underground tournament. Unfortunately, Bear's practice session didn't go smoothly because the new MMA champion, Chulo, seemed unhappy with his presence and started threatening him to leave the ring. In the end, Bear chose to leave even though Chulo still provoked him because he thought Bear was too old to fight in MMA. He even followed Bear out of the gym building and kept provoking him, which eventually made Bear furious and beat him unconscious. Bronx apparently spotted the incident and came to Bear at the gym the next day. He asked to speak to Bear and agreed to be his coach. Bronx's decision to retrain Bear made him determined to change his life so that he threw away all the illegal drugs he had. As the training session begins, Bronx introduces Bear to Red, Skylar's husband. Even though Bear had to be trained by his ex-girlfriend's husband and father, he did not weaken. Instead, he trains hard and diligently every day at the gym without realizing that Summer has been watching him all this time. One day after training, Bear came to the hospital to see Chris, who was apparently still mad at him for what happened on the battlefield. As Bear is about to leave the treatment room, Chris says that the only way for him to make amends is to win the underground tournament. Chris' words prompted Bear to train even harder. Until on match day, Bear managed to knock down the first opponent, Splitter, with only one round. Chulo's next match was against Macho, who Chulo could beat easily. The underground tournament was getting hotter, but Bear chose to wait for the results outside the building. While sitting alone, Summer suddenly came over to ask Bear to have dinner with her. Unfortunately, he refuses her invitation, which makes her leave in tears. After Summer left, Bear was sitting alone again when a group of men approached him this time. They are MMA Mafia who intend to offer cooperation to him so that he loses in the next fight with the lure of big pay. Again, Bear refused, and he made sure to beat his opponent, the Machine, in the next match. On the other hand, the Mafia apparently came to Bronx and offered to cooperate to make Bear lose the battle. In contrast to Bear, who refused the offer, Bronx actually accepted the offer until he gave Bear a drink that had been mixed with drugs while in the locker room. Bear apparently had to face Chulo in the next semifinal match, the much-acclaimed defending MMA champion. However, because of the drink given by Bronx, Bear slowly loses consciousness while fighting in the ring, which Chulo immediately uses to beat him until he loses. The day passed after the tournament, and Bear was at the gym when he met a little boy. The boy was named Micah and was the son of Summer, who was apparently a widow. Bear asks Micah about Summer's whereabouts, which eventually leads him to reveal that Summer is drunk after taking drugs. Bear then came to Summer and helped her take her to the hospital. At that time, he whispered why he could not accept her declaration of love. Bear gives Micah a soldier necklace in the hospital waiting room and asks him to always take care of his mother. The next day, Bear was in the hospital to see Chris when he got a call from the underground MMA tournament organizers. They ask him to return to the fight after discovering cheating on Chulo's team, where it is revealed that Chulo's team put drugs in his drink. The disclosure of the case is apparently due to Red, who secretly tries the drink Bronx gives them without the two of them knowing. Bear rushed back to the gym to meet Bronx and immediately confronted him for trapping Bear. Bronx actually said he was forced to do that to keep Bear safe from the MMA Mafia, because all this time, he had treated Bear like his own son. While on the other hand, Chris' condition continued to decline until he finally fell into a coma. Doctors tried hard to save him, who had lost a heartbeat. At the same time, the MMA tournament continues and confronts Bear with the most dangerous fighter named Darwin. The fight was fierce, and Darwin managed to corner Bear with a barrage of punches. Likewise, in the second round, where Darwin used the Americana strategy to lock Bear and break his arm. Seeing Bear's condition, the referee suggested giving up and ending the fight. But Bear refused. Instead, he insisted on continuing the fight. And during the break between rounds, Bear, for the first time, returned to praying to God so he could win the fight. When in the ring, Red comes to give him a strategy to beat Darwin. The strategy seems to have worked. In the third round, even though initially Darwin managed to continue to attack, Bear was able to turn things around and use Red's strategy to defeat him. The scene returns to the hospital, where Chris's condition was critical. Mia wept bitterly seeing the team of doctors who kept trying to keep Chris from dying. However, Black Bear's closing scene is a surprise. The ending shows Summer and Micah at a cemetery when it rains heavily. Apparently, the funeral was for Bear, who left after his victory against Darwin. However, without anyone knowing, Bear's condition was the same as Chris's, where his internal organs had been damaged due to drug injections by the enemy on the battlefield. so that his age would not be any longer, which made him unable to accept Summer's love. Interestingly, before Bear died, he donated his liver to Chris, which was still healthy. At the funeral, Chris is seen attending with Mia after undergoing liver donor surgery. The moral that can be learned from this movie is about a friend sacrifices who is willing to donate his liver and give all the money for the life of his friend.